Hey, everybody, welcome to the Big Igloo Podcast. I'm here with my sidekick, Travis Johnson.
Always good to be here.
All right. Well, where else are you going to be?
Nowhere.
You just got off work a little bit ago, so.
No better place to be.
Yeah, that's right. Did you have any exciting plans?
Nope.
Lay
on the couch.
So he calls me up and says, hey, let's do a podcast.
And he said, yeah.
I said, yeah.
Let's do it.
It's the kind of guy I am. Anyway, Theology Thursdays. We're going to try and keep things rolling here. Theology Thursdays. Smart theology, dumb dad jokes. And I will supply the
excellent
dumb dad jokes. So that means you got to supply the smart theology. So
okay.
you up to the task?
No pressure. Yeah, definitely.
All right. So I there was a whole series of these I heard the other day, but I can only remember one.
Okay.
Why did the toilet paper roll down the hill?
I don't know.
To get to the bottom.
Some toilet humor.
I'm a recovering youth pastor, so you know,
slowly coming out of there.
Anyway, all right. So there could be more dad jokes here. They could be completely impromptu. So here's the deal. What we're going to do, we've been kind of doing this survey through the New Testament, going through. These are some key passages that I did as a student, and I'm just sharing this wisdom and the things I learned with our listeners and viewers at Grace and the Big Igloo. And really, so last week we talked about, the Gospel of Luke, and we've just been talking about how the Gospel writers have certain themes or certain ideas that they want to get across. And so it's so important that we connect with that. It's not that we can't harmonize gospel accounts or kind of get a survey of Jesus's life, but it's really important that we really get to the core of what is the author trying to say? And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the Gospel of John. And I told you just before this, I'm like, man, we may have to script out some future episodes in the Gospel of John, because John is incredible.
Good stuff.
John is just so stinking incredible. His gospel really does kind of stand alone. And I love the Gospel of John. John has a way of really capturing some ideas. He's very expressive with his language and taps into some ideas and motifs that you don't necessarily see in the other gospel accounts. You know, what do you think? What do you like about John? Yeah,
John. It's like he has like those 7 I am statements, right?
Yeah,
and like looking at those and like making the dot between I'm a vine and I'm the savior of the world. I'm the light of the world.
Right.
I'm the shepherd. Like all these like. And you pick up on those things as like, oh, John's painting a picture of who Jesus is.
Yeah. And again, using very vivid lange, colorful language, using everyday things, that they would have known. We're going to get to one of those that you just said in a second here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go, this is a long passage of scripture, and so just bear with us here. But I want to make sure that we go to this, and we got a frame of reference here. So this is John chapter 9. We're going to read 1 all the way through 41. So I'm going to just jump in, okay? If you've followed Jesus or been a person of faith for any amount of time, this is a pretty familiar story. But I love it. I love it. And here we go. So as he passed by, who's that, Travis? Who's he?
Jesus.
Good job. All right, there you go. Sunday school answer. There you go. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. Who's the man? No, I'm just kidding. Anyway.
The man.
They saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? I want to pause there just for a second, because it's really interesting. This was heavy in ancient times, this idea that if some tragedy befell you or had befallen you, either way, if tragedy had struck, you must have done something wrong. And what's really interesting is we still kind of have some of that residue today.
For sure.
And so, his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents? And every teenager listening said, his parents. And well, let's see what Jesus said here. All right, verse 3. And Jesus answered, it was not this man, is not that this man sinned or his parents. So right there, I mean, automatically, record screech. What?
Yeah.
And but the works of God might be displayed in him. And boy, we could talk.
Whoa.
There's a whole bunch there. Who wants to sign up for that, right? Oof. All right, verse 4. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. There's one of those I am statements, right? Having said these things, he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with mud and said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Now I want to pause here just for a second because I've had the privilege to actually go to Israel. And the pool of Siloam is one of these things that archaeologists thought for a long time it didn't exist. And you know, because it's interesting because when you go over there in Israel, like, cities are built on top of cities on top of cities. I mean, it's just like when they conquered, when you got conquered, they just kind of like, I mean, brought in the bulldozer, so to speak, and just built right on top, right? So there's a lot of things. They could drill down, you know, 10 feet and hit something, and it's like, oh, we got to call the Archaeology Society out here, all this. So they actually uncovered the Pool of Siloam not too, I would say like 40 or 50 years ago, like pretty recent, And so anyway, what's interesting is it's about a quarter mile about from where Jesus would have been, because Jesus, you know, is like over teaching at the temple and all this stuff. But what's crazy is when you're there, you realize in this story, when Jesus, you know, number one, he spits and makes mud.
A little weird.
Right? But that's like, I don't even think that's like the more, I don't want to say cruel. I don't want to call Jesus cruel.
Yeah.
But he sends a blind guy to walk about a quarter mile away to go wash out his eyes. Just a little fun.
Bumping into stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like he was just like, oh yeah, that Pool of Siloam across the street.
And I don't know, with spit and mud probably didn't smell all that great in his eyes either.
Yeah, did it burn? I don't know. It's like, give me to the pool. Anyway, we're having way too much fun with this. Keep moving here. All right, verse 8. It says, the neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some said, it is he. Others said, no, it's like him. He kept saying, I am the man. And you know, here's the deal. If you'd seen somebody every day begging, I mean, let's cut them some credit, right? I am the man. So they said to him, then how were your eyes open? He answered, the man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, where is he? He said, I don't know. Then they brought the Pharisees to the man. Dun, dun, dun. Right, let's get some ominous music here. They brought the Pharisees to the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus had made the mud and opened his eyes. There's something, it just kind of in my recollection, something about this idea, you know, in the rabbinical system, they had a lot of different things like, well, you can't kindle a fire. You can't. Well, that's actually in the Bible where it talks about not kindling a fire on the Sabbath. But the idea that Jesus made mud, to some Jewish readers, that have been like, that's work. That's work. Jesus is working. So Jesus, even the fact that he's making mud, why he did it all, but he's at least pushing their buttons, right? A little bit there. And so Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put mud on my eyes and I washed and I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. He made mud.
How dare he?
No mud pies on the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? Well, that's a valid pushback there. And there was a division among them. So he said again to the blind man, what do you say about him since he has opened your eyes? He said he is a prophet. Okay, that's interesting. Let's look at verse 18. We'll come back to that. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered, we know that this is our son and he was born blind. But how he now sees, we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He's of age. I love the pushback there. It's like, we're gonna get out of here. We're in trouble with the Pharisees. He will speak for himself. His parents said these things. Now, this is key here. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue.
So there's trouble.
There's trouble
if you're talking about Jesus.
Yeah. There's an excommunication here. I mean, so think about that. If you're, to be cast out from the community like that. And, as Americans, we don't connect with that as much because we celebrate the individual.
Sure.
It's all about, well, we almost take on that, I don't know, rebellious tone, or that you just got to be you and don't worry about, your community. We kind of push back against some of the more traditional societies. Now, I'm not saying that's right.
Right.
In fact, I think there's a healthy balance of the two. I think individualism and collectivism. I think there's a way that we need to be community oriented, connected community, but also acknowledge that we're fearfully and wonderfully made at the same time. But it's interesting because the thing is like you give the parents a bad rap here, and I don't think that's helpful because for them to be cut off from the synagogue, think about that. That's a lot of shame there.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they wouldn't be able to worship, so they're kind of like trying to we weren't the ones who were healed.
Go talk to him.
Thanks, Mom and Dad. All right. Sorry, son. I'd like to help you out, but these Pharisees are breathing down our neck. Verse 23, therefore his parents said, he is of age, ask him. Verse 24, so for the second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. I love that answer.
That's good.
I don't know. But
honest answer.
One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see.
Wow.
Kind of hard to argue with that one, isn't it?
Yeah. Should be made into a song.
Right. Oh, there's the dad joke there.
Subtle.
Verse 26, they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Woo! Well, that could have got me slapped by my mother there. That's a little talk back there.
Yeah.
It's talking back to the Pharisees. Do you also want to become one of his disciples? And they reviled him, saying, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. Playing the Moses card. And we know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. The man answered, why this is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And they answered him, you were born in utter sin, and you would teach us? And they cast him out. Oh. Interesting, right? I mean, isn't it crazy where this guy, and I mean, I think this is so good. I mean, just the power of a testimony. I mean, it's like when God does something for you, and you and I we've been around ministry for a long time, and we've seen amazing things. You know, people, whether they're delivered of some addictions, or maybe they are physically healed or whatever. It's like it's hard to argue, isn't it? Yeah.
So the person standing right in front of you, it's like
right. And so it's so powerful, but there's a lot of people that will try to get you to, engage you in theological arguments, right? Yeah. It's kind of interesting. You have some history of like going out on the road, and engaging with students and some of the pushback that you might get, or people that try and pull you into. Yes. Do you see any of that kind of happening here?
Definitely. Because people are always going to be. They're offended, something bad has happened with them, with maybe the church. Yeah. And so anytime you bring Jesus into it, somebody's going to get offended, right? I think. And so, but I see the Pharisees, like their attitude is very much alive today of, people pushing back.
Absolutely. And so the reason why I ask you that is because we're going to get to this here in a second. We're almost to the end here. And I like just kind of dropping in on some of this stuff, but just keep, so he's cast out. So the Pharisees cast him out. And then verse 35, Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him and said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, and who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? So here's the deal. It's interesting because Jesus has done this miracle for him, and he still doesn't quite even know who Jesus is. He's just kind of gotten in this argument and maybe defended Jesus a little bit, theologically to the Pharisees. I mean, the professors of his day, right? And Jesus says to him, he says, you have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. And so he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. And Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, "Are we also blind?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say, 'We see,' your guilt remains." So really, as we just read that whole passage, again, we could kind of take in this story, but now we're going to kind of go into some of these just little details.
Yeah.
Really, this passage, and especially with John, we should ask the question as we look at this. And I kind of almost look at this as like a centerpiece of John. Like this story, like once again, there's things that kind of culminate in this story. And we should be asking the question, what does it mean to be blind?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be blind? And as you approach the story, we see, well, okay, this man is clearly physically blind.
Sure.
Right? He's physically blind, but Jesus starts off in the first couple verses here. He says to his disciples, first of all, they were asking, well, who sinned?
Right.
So the disciples are like, we can't see. That's the thing. Like we should, like the whole time we're reading the story is like, what can people see? What can they not see?
Yeah.
Those are the things that we should be like cluing into. And Jesus says this, he says, we must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. And then he goes on to say, I am the light of the world. Well, if you know the book of John, we can go back to John chapter 1. In John chapter 1, so again, it's amazing. In the beginning was the
Word.
And the Word was
God.
Yeah, with God, and the Word was God. Yep. And then it goes on to talk about how he was this light, and how so he's speaking, we beheld him.
Wow.
But then he goes on to say things like we beheld him, but people loved darkness
rather than the light.
More than light.
Yeah.
So John, again, if we're just reading the Gospel of John and just kind of paying attention to these details, what you start to see is light and dark are metaphors. They're motifs. They're themes. And John's painting this picture and talking about how as humanity, as people, we'd rather behold the darkness rather than the light.
Yeah.
And now we get a story where a man who's blind. Right? This man is blind, and of course, blindness. What would you associate that with?
Darkness.
Yeah, darkness. Right?
Can't see. Yeah.
Exactly. And so yes, it's an actual physical thing that's happening. Now, here's the thing: is you and I were talking about this earlier when we were doing the work on this, and we did group work when I was doing this New Testament class, and we're like. Someone made the observation, there's physical sight and then there's spiritual sight. And I want to be very careful because spiritual is one of these kind of like loaded terms.
Yeah. We hear it all the time.
Right? And people even say things like, well, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Oprah. Nothing against Oprah, just but it's a bit of that kind of just like, well, I'm spiritual, I'm in touch. I believe, and there's obviously transcendence and stuff, but spiritual kind of has a lot of baggage.
Sure.
Whereas as far as I can tell, and even our professor was kind of like, hey, spiritual's kind of a tough term. You want to make sure that you don't get bogged down in that. Sure. But one of the things that my professor was talking about was like, he says, really think about this as like sight plus insight.
Oh, okay.
So there's physical seeing, but there is a deeper level of seeing. And as far as I can tell, it does appear that as much as I can, discern and go through, like, and you got to be careful when you say the ancient people would have thought this or say,
sure.
We don't, right. I mean, it's tough. You're filling a lot of gaps, but it seems to me that they definitely had more of a view of an integrated reality. Okay. And so the idea of what we would call spiritual, I mean, to them, there wasn't a separation or a dichotomy.
It's kind of a both and.
Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And again, not that they even thought about it. It's like, even the word for wind, in the Hebrew is the same word for breath, but it's also the same word for spirit.
Okay.
So you talk about breathe, like, oh, that's your spirit. Well, it's like, when you think about breath as your life source, it's the thing that sustains you, right? It's your spirit. You know, they would talk about like when a person dies, they expel their spirit or their breath and it returns back to God. God breathed in. And we try and parse that out and say things like, oh, that's your spirit or that's your, and it's like, well, yeah, no, you know, to them, it was just a way of understanding, right? So when we look at this, when you're asking this question, well, what does it mean to be blind? And there's an interesting thing that happens in this man's journey. What's the first thing that he says about when the Pharisees come to him or the neighbors come to him and they say, how were your eyes opened? Oh. What does he say?
A prophet.
He doesn't say prophet first.
He doesn't. Okay.
He just says, this man.
Oh, a man. Yeah.
This man named Jesus. He had it like sewn on his shirt, you know, it was like a little... I don't know. He said, hi, my name is Jesus. This guy's like, this man called Jesus. Like, so what's interesting about this is, so this guy gets his sight and he's just like, they're asking him, how did this happen? That's some dude. Okay. Some man. Right? So, you know, does he really know who this is? No, it doesn't seem like it, right? You know? But he's got his physical sight, right? Yeah. And so then they're pressing him. And finally, when the Pharisees come around to him, that's when he answers.
It's a prophet.
He's a prophet. So there's a progression here.
Yeah. It's his answers changed.
Yeah.
And like, it seems like a short time. I guess we don't really know how long, but
yeah, maybe you've had a half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe, I don't know, an hour or two. By the time you get the neighbors, get mom and dad, he's pondering, he's thinking.
He's definitely been chewing on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so what do you see? You go from a man to now, well, he's not just a man. So in the course of just a few verses, who healed you? Well, this man. Pharisees come out. Who healed you? How did you do this? Right?
Yeah.
He said he's a prophet. Like you could see, like there's like this epiphany, revelation, insight. Oh, right. He's growing in this, and I think John is wanting us to see that even though so here's a guy who goes from no physical sight to physical sight. But even he's still on this journey. There's stuff still happening.
Yeah.
Right? And then of course the threat comes with his parents, to be put out of the synagogue and all of that. And ultimately he gives his rebuttal back to the Pharisees and they cast him out. And of course Jesus gets word of this. And so then as you look at this, then when Jesus approaches him and he says, hey, I'll read this again. And do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, and who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? So there's something about like, he obviously at this point believes Jesus is more than a man. He's at least a prophet. So when Jesus is like, hey, do you believe on the Son of Man? And this guy's like, well, I don't know who that is, but if you tell me, because one, you've done this amazing thing for me. You've done this amazing thing for me, and I'll believe you. Because nobody else could do something like this. Nobody could work this kind of miracle. So who do you say? I at least believe you're a prophet. So I at least believe the information you have.
I was gonna say. I mean, he's believing that he's at least like some sort of like man of God.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So absolutely.
Yeah.
And believing that God is with him. I mean, he's provided. I mean, you got to understand, he's going toe to toe. He's a beggar, so very little to no education. I mean, and he's going toe to toe with some of the best educated people on the planet at that time, and he's given a theological, defense of Jesus, and who he at least believes is a prophet. But this is what's crazy. So then the story really, I believe, kind of comes to this culmination when he says, and who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? Verse 37 says, Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. He said, Lord, I believe, and worshiped him.
Dang. I mean, dropping down and just worshiping somebody like that.
Yeah.
Something's clicked and changed
Well, if he's a good Jewish boy, you don't worship the prophet. You don't worship, angels. You don't worship. There's only one worthy of worship. So you talk about this is what's amazing about this story. This guy, it's like he receives this physical sight. Well, we won't say necessarily in an instant. He did have that walk to go on.
That was a journey.
That was a journey.
Yeah.
Oh, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that.
Yeah.
That is interesting because again, if you know the geography and you know the layout, absolutely. Hey, go wash in the pool of Siloam. Like he had to navigate to get there. Hey, somebody help me. Somebody walking, crawling, whatever. And I mean, from what I understand of people who are blind, they do develop a really good sense of tracking so many steps to different things. So he may have known the landmarks and stuff like that, but still he had at least a quarter mile to go one time around a track, right? I mean, like he had a quarter mile to go. And that, like you said, I like thinking about that. Like that's a journey in and of itself. He goes, washes out, and all of a sudden I can see. So his physical sight comes to him seemingly, at least in the story, it's seemingly instantaneously, right?
Yeah.
But his journey's not over. His journey's not over because right at that point, Jesus is just a man to him.
And that's after he receives the sight.
Yeah. And so people are like, wait a minute, the neighbors are who's, aren't you the one? Yeah, it's him. No, it's just someone who looks like him. Right. And so here's what's interesting. He's on his journey and it's some guy healed me. Ponders it a little bit more. No, it has to be at least a prophet. And then in encounter with the Pharisees, no, it was God. It was God. It was God. God healed me because he worships him. He worships him. And I think that's what John is trying to get us to see is this man, though, he was physically blind and then receives his sight, he gains additional insight. The journey wasn't over. The other thing too is to then look at the people around him. And so we should contrast and think about, okay, so here's a man physically blind, receives his sight, and gains insight. Again, I want to say spiritual insight. I'm trying not to say that, right? And our listeners or watchers, you might be thinking, it's spiritual. Well, but let's be careful with that term.
Sure.
But what about what could be said about the insight from the people around him?
It seems like they don't get it.
They don't get it.
They're still,
they don't get it. And that's, and so again, once again, when we understand kind of some of these themes and motifs, and again, we got to do this in the Gospel of John, like this will maybe be a future series, but when you look at this, I mean, when he talks about, again, this is connected to the I am the light of the world. We'll go back to chapter 1 and read about light and darkness, and we're seeing it. This is an example. This is like almost like a climax of the book of John, where we're seeing in action how people loved darkness more than light. People loved darkness so much they could not see the beggar. That's him. No, it just looks like him. What is that? I don't. Because again, and there's a little insight too of like, because there was this political threat, this community threat. You can't believe in Jesus. If you do, you can't come to synagogue anymore. And so there was this control and manipulation. And so which begs the question of us today as we think about this, and the implications that it has for us when it comes to Jesus and how he has revealed himself to us, it confronts all of us with a choice. What are you going to do with it?
Got to chew on it.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's interesting. Sometimes we talk about Jesus and for the believers, like you're talking to somebody that doesn't believe. And we kind of expect this immediate response. But I mean, this story, it's a little drawn out.
Absolutely.
And so,
And so as we think, we'll just kind of bring this to a close here and hopefully, we've given people some things to chew on here and stuff. But again, the practical implications for us is are we willing to see Jesus for who he really is? Even if it costs us family, even if it costs us our social reputation, even if it costs us our community. I know people who have given their lives to the Lord, gained this insight, see Jesus for who he is, and had to leave a certain group of friends behind. not because they didn't love him anymore, but actually it was more like they kind of got thrown out, you know, because all of a sudden Jesus became the thing that they loved the most. Yeah. And they were basically told in, no uncertain terms, but, like, no, sorry, you can take that somewhere else, and to be cast out. And Jesus speaks of that. He speaks of, not loving things more than him. And so anyway, it's something for us to consider that, who are we in this story? Are we ones who will run to this guy's defense? Are we the ones who are like, well, who did wrong? I want to blame. Who is it, God? Who is it? Well, no, maybe this is just for this divine purpose here, right now. Yeah. So.
Dang.
What do you think?
So, talking about light, darkness, all that stuff. I was going to say, you just asking yourself, like, where am I at in this story?
Yeah.
And that blindness, like, sometimes, like, when you're blind, you don't know that you're blind.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, you don't, and I think, I was going to say people don't know, but I think there probably is a sense of, I know what I'm doing is wrong.
Right.
But, yep.
Yeah, I really believe, I believe Holy Spirit is out there. It's interesting because it's a willful blindness, if you will. Andy Stanley, I remember years ago, I came across this analogy. This could be a good place to land it. Yes. Andy Stanley was talking about how, it's actually in the Gospel of John, we quote, and you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. Right. And Andy Stanley was like, that's not what that says exactly.
Okay.
He says that's actually part of this whole phrase or this whole statement where before that it says, that, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, basically then you will, basically it's kind of like this, if, then you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. But it's all connected to this idea. And of course, John loves abiding because you got John 15, I am the vine, abide in me. Yep. There's this remaining. And Andy Stanley said this. He said, if you've ever gone to like a movie in the afternoon, if you've ever gone to a movie in the afternoon, you're sitting in the theater, you watch the movie, credits, all that, the room's real dark. And if you take that exit door, it just takes you right to the outside. Yeah. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
Like,
yep.
Like you're just getting stabbed in the eyes, right? And Andy Stanley said, he says, you crack that door open and like it hits you. And he goes, there's a temptation to retreat.
Go back to the darkness.
We all have a tendency. We want to go back to the darkness. Like, I can't stand that. Oh, but we don't, because we know that if we will remain, our eyes will acclimate, right? Yep. And then we'll be able to see. There's something about when we come to Jesus that if we'll let him slap the mud on our eyes, right? Our spiritual eyes. No, just kidding. Right. But if we come to Jesus and we let him do his work, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable at first. When he confronts us with truth, it's blinding. And every single one of us has temptation to say, I'm good. I want to go back because I know what's behind me. I know what darkness is like, and the light's making me uncomfortable. And so, for us, there's a very real temptation at times in our lives to retreat. And if we do, this story serves as, we don't want to be like the Pharisees. We don't want to be like his parents. His parents weren't even really willing to go to bat for him. Yeah. Right. But here's the deal. We don't just read this story and go, wow, what a neat story. No, we read this story and go, where am I at in this story? Where do I shy away from truth? Yeah. Right. Because I need sight. I need insight. And Jesus provides those things.
So good.
So anyway, well, hey, that's all we got for you this week. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. We'd love it if you'd go to either Apple Podcast or Spotify and go to Big Igloo Podcast and find us on there and subscribe. Then that way it just automatically shows up. It's like magic.
It's on your phone.
Yeah.
Right there.
Anyway, so we'll catch you later.